They told her that precision shooting was a man's game, that women lacked the steady nerves and killer instinct required for life-or-death marksmanship. They said her hands would tremble when it mattered most, that she'd freeze under pressure when enemy crosshairs found their mark. Then Staff Sergeant Rebecca Chen redefined what it meant to be invisible death from impossible distances, proving that the deadliest weapon in any sniper's arsenal isn't testosterone. It's absolute uncompromising precision. The Montana wilderness stretched endlessly before the forward operating base, a tapestry of jagged peaks and dense pine forests that had swallowed more than one soldier who underestimated its harsh beauty. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Rebecca Chen pressed herself against the frozen ground of Hill 847, her breath forming crystalline clouds in the -20 air, as she peered through her scope at targets that existed more as mathematical possibilities than visible threats. The Advanced Scout Sniper School had never graduated a female candidate in its 47-year history, and Master Gunnery Sergeant Jake Morrison intended to keep that record intact. Morrison stood behind the firing line with his arms crossed, watching Rebecca's every movement through binoculars that had witnessed the failure of countless hopefuls who thought they possessed what it took to join the Marine Corps' most elite marksmen. His weathered face bore the scars of 3 combat deployments and the cynical expression of someone who had seen too many promising candidates crumble when precision became a matter of survival rather than sport. The morning briefing had been clear about his expectations. Rebecca would wash out before noon, saving everyone the embarrassment of pretending that political correctness could overcome biological limitations. The qualification course spread across 12 miles of unforgiving terrain, with targets positioned at distances that pushed both equipment and human capability to their absolute limits. Steel plates measuring 18 inches in diameter, weighted at 800 meters, respectable shots that most infantry soldiers would consider challenging. But these were merely warm-up exercises for what lay beyond, where targets shrank to the size of dinner plates at ranges exceeding 1,500 meters. The final challenges involved silhouettes barely larger than playing cards positioned at distances where atmospheric conditions mattered more than marksmanship fundamentals. Rebecca's rifle was a precision-built Remington 700 chambered in .300 Winchester Magnum, equipped with a Leupold scope that cost more than most soldiers earned in 6 months. Every component had been personally selected and meticulously adjusted by the school's armorers, who took pride in providing equipment that eliminated mechanical excuses for failure. The trigger broke at exactly 3 pounds of pressure, smooth as silk and crisp as breaking glass. The barrel had been hand-lapped and stress-relieved, capable of placing bullets within half-inch groups at 100 yards when fired from a stable rest. The ammunition was match-grade federal gold metal, with bullets weighing 168 grains, and loaded to specifications that provided consistent velocities within 10 feet per second. Each cartridge had been inspected individually, with measurements taken for overall length, case neck tension, and powder charge weight. The ballistic coefficient of the bullets had been verified through laboratory testing, providing data that would allow Rebecca to calculate precise trajectories for targets at any range within her rifle's capability. Rebecca's shooting partner for the qualification was Corporal David Kim, a soft-spoken marksman from Seattle, who had initially requested a different assignment when told he would be spotting for a female candidate. Kim's skepticism had deep roots in conversations with instructors, who had privately expressed doubts about women's ability to perform under the psychological pressure that separated snipers from recreational target shooters. He had witnessed several male candidates suffer complete mental breakdowns when live-fire exercises replaced paper targets with realistic combat scenarios. The observation post where Morrison and his assistant instructors monitored the Qualification was equipped with high-powered spotting scopes and communication equipment that allowed them to coordinate with range safety personnel positioned throughout the valley. Every shot would be recorded by multiple observers, with impact locations documented through high-speed photography that could resolve bullet holes in steel plates from distances exceeding 2 miles. The technology eliminated any possibility of disputed scores or generous interpretations of marginal hits. Morrison's assistant, Staff Sergeant Lisa Rodriguez, maintained careful neutrality regarding Rebecca's chances while privately hoping that a successful female graduate would finally silence the persistent questions about gender discrimination in sniper selection. Rodriguez had fought her own battles against institutional bias during her 15-year career, earning respect through competence rather than accommodation. She understood the political implications of Rebecca's attempt, while recognizing that lowered standards would ultimately harm women more than exclusion. The meteorological conditions on Hill 847 were deteriorating as a low-pressure system moved through the region, bringing wind gusts that exceeded 20 miles per hour and temperature fluctuations that would affect bullet trajectories in unpredictable ways. The barometric pressure was dropping steadily, causing air density changes that would alter the ballistic performance of Rebecca's ammunition throughout the day. Snow flurries began intermittently, reducing visibility and creating additional challenges for long-range target identification. Rebecca's personal history with firearms began at age 12 when her father, a Vietnam veteran and competitive shooter, introduced her to marksmanship as a way to build confidence and discipline. Unlike her 3 brothers who treated shooting as recreation, Rebecca approached each range session with scientific precision, maintaining detailed logs of every shot fired and analyzing performance data to identify areas for improvement. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. By age 16, she was outperforming adult competitors at state-level matches, winning scholarships that would eventually fund her college education. Her decision to enlist in the Marine Corps came after completing a mechanical engineering degree at UC Berkeley, where she had continued competitive shooting while maintaining a perfect academic record. Rebecca's college shooting coach, a former Marine sniper, had encouraged her military service while warning about the institutional resistance she would face as a woman seeking combat specialties. His recommendation letter emphasized her exceptional mental discipline and ability to perform under pressure, qualities that had been demonstrated through years of high-level competition. The physical standards for Scout Sniper School were intentionally demanding, designed to eliminate candidates who lacked the strength and endurance required for extended operations in austere environments. Rebecca had exceeded every fitness requirement. During her initial screening, posting scores that ranked in the top 10% of all male candidates tested during the previous year. Her performance on the obstacle course, combat conditioning test, and forced march had surprised instructors, who had expected marginally acceptable results from a female applicant. Morrison's briefing to the range safety personnel had emphasized his expectation that Rebecca would voluntarily withdraw before completing half the qualification course, sparing everyone the awkwardness of an official failure that might generate unwanted attention from higher headquarters. He had privately instructed his spotters to document any safety violations or procedural errors that could justify removing her from the course without reference to gender-related performance issues. The first target waited at 800 meters, positioned on a hillside that required Rebecca to account for the upward angle when calculating bullet trajectory. Shooting uphill shortened the effective range by reducing the gravitational effect on the projectile, a physics principle that many marksmen failed to understand completely. Rebecca's ballistic calculator provided the theoretical adjustment, but successful hits would require integrating multiple variables, including wind speed, air temperature, humidity, and the precise angle of engagement. Rebecca's shooting position was a natural depression, behind a fallen log that provided excellent concealment while offering stable support for her rifle. She had spent 20 minutes preparing the position, clearing debris that might interfere with her rifle's recoil and arranging equipment for easy access throughout the lengthy shooting sequence. Her ghillie suit was a masterpiece of camouflage art, constructed over months of careful work with materials gathered from environments similar to those found around Hill 847. The suit incorporated pine branches, dried grasses, and bark strips that had been treated with scent-eliminating chemicals to reduce the possibility of detection by wildlife that might compromise her position. Rebecca understood that successful snipers were invisible not just to human observers, but to the forest creatures, whose alarm calls could reveal hidden positions to alert enemies. Her construction techniques had been learned from a retired Marine sniper who operated a private training facility in North Carolina. Corporal Kim's spotting position offered an excellent view of the target area, while remaining concealed from potential observers who might be monitoring the qualification exercise. His responsibilities included wind reading, target identification, impact observation, and range estimation using techniques that required years of training to master completely. Kim's scope was a high-end Leica unit that provided magnification levels exceeding 20 power, allowing him to observe bullet impacts that would be invisible to shooters using standard equipment. The mathematics of long-range shooting fascinated Rebecca in ways that her instructors found either impressive or suspicious, depending on their personal attitudes toward female Marines in combat roles. She approached each shot like an engineering problem, considering variables that ranged from Coriolis effects caused by Earth's rotation to the thermal expansion of her rifle barrel as it heated from repeated firing. Her shooting notebook contained pages of formulas and environmental data collected during months of preparation for this qualification attempt. Rebecca's breathing technique was based on methods developed by Olympic marksmen and refined through consultation with physiologists who studied human performance under stress. She had learned to reduce her heart rate through controlled respiration while maintaining the oxygen levels necessary for sustained mental acuity during extended shooting sessions. Her resting pulse averaged 52 beats per minute, exceptionally low for someone her age and a significant advantage when shooting required precise timing between heartbeats. The wind was the eternal enemy of precision shooting, capable of deflecting bullets several inches off target, even when speeds appeared manageable to untrained observers. Rebecca had developed an almost supernatural ability to read atmospheric conditions by observing vegetation movement, dust patterns, and the behavior of smoke or moisture in the air. She could predict wind speed and direction at multiple points along a bullet's trajectory, accounting for the possibility that conditions might change during the projectile's flight time. Morrison's reputation as the most demanding instructor in Scout Sniper School was based on failure rates that approached 90% for male candidates who arrived with impressive credentials and high confidence levels. He had personally eliminated candidates who were later accepted into other special operations programs, maintaining standards that he considered non-negotiable regardless of political pressure from senior officers who wanted to see more diverse graduation statistics. His teaching methods emphasized stress inoculation through scenarios that replicated the psychological pressure of combat situations where missed shots resulted in friendly casualties rather than missed points on a scorecard. Morrison believed that snipers were born with certain innate characteristics that could be enhanced through training, but never created in their absence. Mental toughness, emotional stability, and the ability to kill at distances where targets retained human features were traits that he considered rare in any population. Rebecca's academic approach to marksmanship had produced shooting logs that documented every round fired during her preparation, including environmental conditions, equipment settings, and detailed analysis of performance variations. Her data revealed consistency levels that exceeded those typically achieved by male Marines with years of operational experience. Morrison had reviewed her records with grudging admiration, while maintaining skepticism about her ability to perform when theoretical knowledge met life-or-death reality. The rifle scope that Rebecca peered through represented decades of optical engineering advances, providing image clarity that allowed precise aiming at distances where targets appeared as barely visible specks against complex backgrounds. Reticle was a mil-dot system that enabled range estimation and wind compensation through mathematical calculations that required understanding trigonometry principles taught in advanced mathematics courses. Rebecca's engineering background provided advantages that most military marksmen lacked, allowing her to optimize equipment performance through modifications that were invisible to casual observers. Her ammunition selection had involved extensive testing with different bullet weights, powder charges, and primer types to identify combinations that provided optimal accuracy from her specific rifle. The load development process had consumed hundreds of rounds and weeks of range time, resulting in hand-loaded cartridges that were tailored to her weapon's unique characteristics. Each round represented a precisely calculated combination of components that had been verified through ballistic testing at multiple ranges and environmental conditions. The first shot of Rebecca's qualification would establish the tone for everything that followed, demonstrating either competence that demanded respect or uncertainty that confirmed Morrison's expectations about female limitations under pressure. She had visualized this moment thousands of times during mental rehearsal sessions, imagining every possible scenario that might arise during the qualification. Her preparation extended beyond technical training to include psychological conditioning, designed to maintain performance when adrenaline and stress hormones flooded her system. Rebecca's family background had provided early exposure to precision shooting through her father's involvement in competitive marksmanship, but her motivation for military service came from personal convictions about serving her country rather than family tradition. She was the first person in her immediate family to choose military service, a decision that had generated mixed reactions from relatives who understood the dangers, while admiring her courage to pursue goals that challenged conventional expectations. About women's roles in combat. The political implications of Rebecca's qualification attempt extended far beyond individual achievement to encompass broader questions about military effectiveness and social engineering that were being debated. At the highest levels of government, defense officials were under pressure to demonstrate progress in gender integration while maintaining combat effectiveness that could mean the difference between victory and defeat in actual conflicts. Rebecca's performance would provide ammunition for both advocates and critics of expanded roles for women in direct combat positions. Morrison's personal experience with female Marines in combat support roles had been uniformly positive, leading to internal conflicts about his opposition to women in sniper positions that he found difficult to resolve logically. He had witnessed women demonstrate courage, competence, and dedication under combat conditions that would challenge any Marine regardless of gender. His resistance to female snipers was based more on tradition and instinct than empirical evidence, creating cognitive dissonance that he preferred not to examine closely. The observation post buzzed with subdued conversation as instructors positioned themselves to monitor Rebecca's performance through equipment that would capture every detail of her shooting technique for later analysis. High-speed cameras would record her trigger manipulation, body position, and follow-through, providing data that could be reviewed frame by frame to identify strengths and weaknesses in her approach. The documentation would become part of the school's archives, regardless of whether Rebecca succeeded or failed in her qualification attempt. Rebecca's physical conditioning had been developed through training programs that exceeded normal Marine Corps standards, incorporating exercises specifically designed to enhance the strength and endurance required for extended periods in shooting positions that demanded absolute stability. She could maintain precise aim for hours without significant degradation in performance, a capability that distinguished professional snipers from recreational marksmen who excelled during brief range sessions but struggled with sustained precision under field conditions. Her mental conditioning had been equally comprehensive, involving visualization techniques borrowed from elite athletes and meditation practices that enhanced concentration while reducing the physiological effects of stress. Rebecca had learned to compartmentalize emotional responses that might interfere with the cold calculation required for precision shooting, developing the emotional detachment that successful snipers needed to function effectively in combat environments where empathy could prove fatal. The weather monitoring equipment positioned throughout the valley provided real-time data about atmospheric conditions that would affect bullet trajectories in ways that were invisible to human senses, but measurable through sophisticated instrumentation. Wind speeds, air temperature, humidity levels, and barometric pressure readings were continuously updated, allowing shooters to make precise adjustments for environmental factors that could mean the difference between hits and misses at extreme ranges. Rebecca's equipment inspection had been completed before dawn, with every component verified for proper function and optimal configuration. Her rifle's zero had been confirmed through test shots fired at a shorter range, ensuring that the relationship between point of aim and point of impact was correctly established for the longer shots that would follow. The scope's tracking accuracy had been verified through box tests that confirmed the mechanical adjustments corresponded precisely to actual changes in bullet impact location. Morrison observed Rebecca's preparation with the critical eye of someone who had seen overconfident candidates destroy themselves through inadequate attention to details that seemed insignificant to inexperienced shooters. Her methodical approach impressed him despite his skepticism about the ultimate outcome, suggesting training and preparation that exceeded what he typically observed from male candidates, who relied more on intuition than systematic analysis. The psychological pressure of performing under close observation, while carrying the burden of representing all women in combat roles, created stress levels that no amount of training could completely simulate. Rebecca understood that her failure would be interpreted as evidence of female limitations rather than individual shortcomings, while success would be dismissed as an exception that proved the rule about gender-based performance differences. The unfairness of these expectations was something she had learned to accept rather than fight. Her shooting position allowed for minor adjustments in rifle cant and sight alignment that could improve accuracy at long range, while remaining undetectable to observers who might interpret position changes as nervousness or uncertainty. Rebecca had practiced these micro-adjustments until they became unconscious habits, allowing her to optimize her shooting platform without drawing attention to techniques that less experienced marksmen might not recognize or understand. The rifle's cold barrel would heat gradually as shots were fired, causing thermal expansion that could shift the point of impact in predictable patterns that experienced shooters learned to anticipate and compensate for through careful monitoring of barrel temperature and corresponding adjustments to their aiming points. Rebecca's training had included extensive work with temperature effects on accuracy, providing her with empirical data about her rifle's behavior under various thermal conditions. Kim's spotting responsibilities would become increasingly critical. As ranges extended and environmental factors complicated bullet trajectories in ways that required expert interpretation of atmospheric conditions along the projectile's flight path, his ability to read wind patterns and predict their effects on bullet drift would determine whether Rebecca's precision shooting could be translated into successful target engagement at distances where mathematical calculations became less reliable than experienced judgment. The first target acquisition through Rebecca's scope revealed a steel plate that appeared deceptively close despite the 800-meter distance that separated her position from the hillside where it waited. The magnification provided by her optics compressed the apparent range while revealing details about the target and its Immediate surroundings that would be invisible to observers using lesser equipment. Rebecca could see the mounting hardware that secured the plate to its frame, and the bolt holes that would provide aiming references for precise shot placement. Morrison's commentary to his assistant instructors revealed skepticism tempered by grudging respect for Rebecca's obvious preparation and professional demeanor. He had expected nervousness or hesitation that would justify his doubts about female suitability for sniper training, but her behavior suggested confidence based on competence rather than bravado. The dichotomy between his expectations and observations created internal tension that he found uncomfortable to acknowledge. Rebecca's breathing settled into the rhythm that she had practiced thousands of times during dry-fire exercises, with each inhalation and exhalation timed to coincide with the natural oscillations of her rifle's point of aim. Her body had learned to minimize movement during the respiratory cycle, reducing the physical disturbances that could affect precision when timing was measured in fractions of seconds. The technique was fundamental to precision shooting, but required months of practice to execute unconsciously under stress. The crosshairs found their position on the center of the 800-meter target with steady precision that suggested Rebecca's training had been more comprehensive than Morrison had assumed possible for someone without operational experience. Her sight picture was textbook perfect, with the reticle centered in the scope's field of view and the target clearly defined against its background. The fundamentals of marksmanship appeared to be second nature rather than consciously applied techniques. Rebecca's finger found the trigger face with the same unconscious precision that a pianist's fingers found familiar keys, settling into position that would allow straight back pressure without any lateral movement that could disturb the rifle's alignment. Her trigger control had been developed through thousands of dry-fire repetitions that had trained her muscles to apply pressure with mathematical consistency, regardless of environmental conditions or psychological stress. The moment before trigger break stretched into an eternity of suspended possibility as physics and training combined to determine whether Rebecca's preparation had been sufficient for the challenges that awaited. Her mind processed wind indicators, calculated holdoffs for atmospheric conditions, and timed the shot to coincide with the optimal moment when her body achieved perfect stillness between heartbeats. The integration of technical knowledge with physical execution represented the highest levels of marksmanship that few shooters ever achieved. Morrison found himself holding his breath as he watched Rebecca prepare for the shot that would establish the baseline for everything that followed. His binoculars revealed subtle indicators of her mental state and physical condition that would predict her performance under the increasing pressure of longer ranges and more challenging conditions. Despite his skepticism about the ultimate outcome, he recognized that she was approaching the shot with competence that exceeded his expectations for any candidate on their first qualification attempt. The trigger broke with crystalline clarity, releasing the first round in a qualification sequence that would either validate or destroy months of preparation and years of dreams. Rebecca's follow-through was automatic, maintaining sight picture and trigger pressure, while tracking the bullet's flight toward a target that would provide the first concrete evidence of her capabilities under the intense scrutiny of instructors who expected failure. The sound of the shot echoed across the valley like thunder, carrying with it the hopes and doubts of everyone who witnessed the beginning of what might become a historic achievement or a predictable disappointment. The metallic ping of bullets striking steel rang across the Montana Valley with crystalline clarity, confirming Rebecca's first hit at 800 meters. The sound carried a finality that seemed to settle something in the frozen air between her position and the observation post where Morrison stood with his binoculars locked on the target. Through his optics, he could see the fresh impact crater dead center in the steel plate, a hole punched with mathematical precision that left no room for interpretation or generous scoring. Corporal Kim's voice crackled through the radio with professional composure despite the surprise evident in his tone. Center hit, perfect score. His spotting scope had tracked the bullet's vapor trail through the crisp mountain air, watching physics and preparation combine into an outcome that exceeded his privately held expectations. Kim had spotted for dozens of candidates during his 2 years at the school, and Rebecca's shot placement ranked among the finest he had observed from any shooter on their initial qualification attempt. Morrison lowered his binoculars with the expression of someone whose fundamental assumptions had just encountered uncomfortable evidence. The shot had been executed with textbook precision, displaying none of the hesitation or technical errors that typically characterized female shooters during his limited exposure to women in marksmanship roles. His assistant instructors exchanged glances that reflected their own surprise at witnessing competence that contradicted their collective prejudices about gender and shooting performance. The second target waited at 1,000 meters, positioned on a ridge that required Rebecca to account for atmospheric conditions that were deteriorating as the morning progressed. Wind flags positioned throughout the valley showed increasing volatility, with gusts reaching 25 miles per hour and creating turbulence patterns that would challenge even experienced marksmen. The steel plate appeared barely visible through her scope, reduced to a gray circle that wavered in the thermal currents rising from the sun-warmed valley floor. Rebecca's ballistic calculator provided theoretical adjustments for the increased range, but successful hits would require integrating wind readings with atmospheric data that changed constantly throughout the day. The temperature differential between her elevated position and the valley floor created convection currents that could deflect bullets in unpredictable directions, demanding real-time interpretation of environmental signs that most marksmen never learn to read accurately. Her rifle's bolt cycled smoothly as she chambered the second round, the precision-machined action operating with the mechanical perfection that justified its reputation among competitive shooters and military snipers. Rebecca's manipulation of the firearm was economical and fluid, each movement serving a specific purpose without wasted motion that might disturb her shooting position or reveal her location to potential observers monitoring the qualification exercise. The scope's turrets clicked with mechanical precision as Rebecca dialed in the elevation adjustment required for the 1,000-meter target. Each click represented a quarter minute of angle, roughly a quarter inch of bullet movement at 100 yards. The mathematical relationship between angular adjustments and linear displacement at various ranges was fundamental knowledge that separated precision shooters from casual marksmen who relied on guesswork and luck. Kim's wind reading responsibilities became increasingly critical as the range extended beyond what most infantry soldiers considered effective rifle distance. His spotting scope revealed mirage patterns and vegetation movement that indicated atmospheric conditions invisible to Rebecca through her shooting optics. The partnership between shooter and spotter required absolute trust and seamless communication, with split-second decisions potentially determining the difference between success and failure. Morrison's radio crackled with reports from safety personnel positioned throughout the valley, confirming that range conditions remained within acceptable parameters, despite the increasing wind speeds that were approaching the upper limits for precision shooting. The meteorological data revealed barometric pressure dropping steadily as a weather front moved through the region, creating atmospheric instability that would complicate trajectory calculations for the longer shots that lay ahead. Rebecca's mental calculations integrated multiple variables that most shooters handled through ballistic computers or simplified rule-of-thumb approximations. Her engineering background provided mathematical tools for analyzing complex problems that involved atmospheric physics, projectile dynamics, and statistical probability theory applied to real-world shooting scenarios. The intersection of theoretical knowledge with practical application represented advantages that few military marksmen possessed. The second shot required more complex wind compensation, as flags near the target showed different conditions than those at Rebecca's firing position. She studied the mirage patterns visible through her scope, learning to read the atmosphere like a weather map written in shimmering air. The skill required pattern recognition abilities that could only be developed through thousands of hours observing how atmospheric conditions affected bullet trajectories under varying circumstances. Her breathing rhythm remained controlled and steady despite the increasing pressure of performing under intense scrutiny from instructors who expected failure. Rebecca had learned to compartmentalize external stressors while maintaining the physiological control necessary for precision shooting, developing emotional regulation techniques that allowed her to function effectively regardless of environmental or psychological challenges that might overwhelm less experienced shooters. The crosshairs settled on the 1,000-meter target with the same unwavering stability that had characterized her first shot, but Rebecca's mind was already processing the subtle differences in atmospheric conditions that would affect this longer engagement. The wind had shifted slightly since her previous shot, requiring adjustments to her hold-off that demanded real-time interpretation of environmental indicators that changed faster than formal calculations could accommodate. Morrison found himself hoping that Rebecca's second shot would reveal the limitations he expected from female candidates under pressure, providing justification for his skepticism about women in sniper roles. His institutional bias created cognitive dissonance when confronted with evidence that contradicted decades of assumptions about gender-based performance, differences in high-stress military occupations. The internal conflict between preconceptions and observations was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Rebecca's trigger finger found its position with the same unconscious precision that had characterized thousands of practice sessions, settling against the trigger face with pressure that would break the shot at exactly the optimal moment when atmospheric conditions and physical stability aligned perfectly. Her muscle memory had been developed through dry-fire exercises that trained consistent trigger manipulation regardless of environmental conditions or psychological stress. The 1,000-meter shot broke with mechanical precision, sending another 168-grain projectile toward a target that existed at the edge of what most marksmen considered reliable engagement range. Rebecca's follow-through was automatic, maintaining sight picture and trigger pressure while tracking the bullet's vapor trail through atmospheric layers that created optical distortions visible only to experienced observers with high-quality equipment. Kim's spotting scope tracked the projectile's flight path through air that was becoming increasingly unstable as thermal currents developed throughout the valley. His experience reading atmospheric conditions allowed him to predict bullet drift with accuracy that exceeded what most shooters could achieve through technological aids alone. The partnership between Rebecca and Kim was developing into the seamless coordination that characterized the most effective sniper teams. The second impact confirmation came with another satisfying ring of steel, followed by Kim's radio call that documented another center hit despite environmental conditions that were becoming increasingly challenging. Morrison's expression revealed grudging acknowledgement that Rebecca's performance was exceeding his expectations, though he maintained skepticism about her ability to sustain precision as ranges extended and pressure mounted throughout the qualification course. Target 3 waited at 1,200 meters, positioned in a location that had been specifically chosen to challenge candidates' ability to engage threats at ranges where most conventional military doctrine considered rifle fire ineffective. The steel plate appeared as little more than a speck through Rebecca's scope, barely larger than the reticle intersection that would guide her aiming point. Success would require perfect execution of fundamentals, combined with expert interpretation of atmospheric conditions that were becoming increasingly volatile. The atmospheric data revealed temperature gradients that would affect bullet trajectories in ways that standard ballistic tables couldn't predict accurately. Rebecca's understanding of thermodynamics and fluid mechanics provided insights into how air density variations would influence projectile behavior along the entire flight path, allowing her to make compensation adjustments that went beyond simple wind speed and direction considerations that most marksmen relied upon. Her shooting position remained stable and comfortable despite the extended time spent in prone position on the frozen ground that was beginning to conduct dangerous amounts of body heat away from her core. Rebecca's physical conditioning and mental discipline allowed her to maintain precision, despite environmental stressors that would compromise the performance of less prepared shooters. Her preparation had included cold weather training specifically designed to prepare for conditions like those she was experiencing. Morrison's radio communications with range safety personnel revealed growing concern about weather conditions that were approaching the limits of what was considered safe for precision shooting exercises. Wind gusts were exceeding 30 miles per hour in some areas of the valley, creating atmospheric turbulence that could make accurate bullet placement impossible even for the most skilled marksmen. The decision to continue or postpone the qualification would soon need to be made based on safety considerations that transcended individual performance evaluations. Rebecca's third shot preparation involved more complex calculations as she accounted for the Coriolis effect that became measurable at extreme ranges where the Earth's rotation could deflect bullets by several inches from their intended impact points. Her ballistic notebook contained correction factors for various ranges and latitudes, providing reference data that had been verified through extensive testing under controlled conditions. The integration of theoretical physics with practical marksmanship separated professional snipers from recreational target shooters. The wind reading for the 1,200-meter shot required Kim to interpret atmospheric conditions at multiple elevations along the bullet's flight path, accounting for the possibility that wind patterns might change during the projectile's nearly 2-second journey toward the target. His spotting scope revealed dust patterns and vegetation movement that indicated complex air currents flowing through the mountainous terrain in ways that defied simple prediction based on surface observations alone. Rebecca's scope adjustments required multiple clicks of elevation to compensate for bullet drop that would exceed 6 feet during the projectile's parabolic flight toward the distant target. The mathematical relationship between range and gravitational effects on bullet trajectory was fundamental ballistics knowledge, but applying these principles under field conditions with constantly changing atmospheric variables required expertise that few marksmen ever developed completely. Her mental state had achieved the focused clarity that characterized peak performance in high-stress situations, where success demanded the integration of technical knowledge with intuitive understanding of complex physical systems. Rebecca's engineering training had provided analytical tools for breaking down complicated problems into manageable components, allowing her to maintain cognitive function despite the mounting pressure of performing under intense scrutiny from skeptical observers. Morrison's observations revealed shooting technique that exceeded what he typically saw from experienced candidates with years of operational background, creating internal conflict about his assumptions regarding female capabilities in precision marksmanship roles. Rebecca's fundamentals were textbook perfect, displaying none of the technical flaws that usually provided convenient explanations for candidate failures during the school's demanding qualification process. The third shot's execution required perfect timing to coincide with momentary atmospheric stability between wind gusts that were becoming increasingly frequent and unpredictable. Rebecca waited for the natural pause in her breathing cycle when her body achieved perfect stillness, coordinating respiratory control with environmental conditions to create the optimal moment for trigger break. The skill required patience and discipline that separated professional snipers from impatient shooters who forced shots during unfavorable conditions. Kim's final wind call for the 1,200-meter engagement integrated observations from multiple indicators throughout the valley, providing Rebecca with atmospheric data that would determine whether her preparation and skill were sufficient. to overcome environmental challenges that were approaching the limits of what precision shooting could reasonably achieve. His experience reading complex wind patterns would prove crucial for the success of shots that pushed beyond the boundaries of conventional marksmanship doctrine. The trigger broke with the same crystalline precision that had characterized Rebecca's previous shots, but the atmospheric conditions during the bullet's flight would determine whether technical perfection could overcome environmental variables that exceeded human ability to predict or control completely. Her follow-through remained consistent despite the increasing difficulty of maintaining sight picture through atmospheric distortion that was worsening as thermal activity increased throughout the valley. Morrison's binoculars tracked the target area while his radio provided updates from spotters positioned closer to the impact zone, creating a communication network that would document Rebecca's performance with scientific precision regardless of the outcome. The institutional reputation of the Scout Sniper School depended on maintaining objective standards that couldn't be compromised by political considerations or social pressure to achieve specific demographic outcomes. The third impact confirmation arrived with another metallic ring that echoed across the valley with authority, followed by Kim's amazed radio call documenting another perfect center hit despite atmospheric conditions that would have challenged the most experienced snipers in the Marine Corps. Morrison's expression revealed surprise that he couldn't completely conceal, acknowledging that Rebecca's performance was forcing him to reconsider assumptions that had shaped his thinking for decades. Target 4 waited at 1,500 meters, officially entering what military doctrine classified as extreme, long-range territory where atmospheric effects, dominated trajectory calculations and equipment limitations began to influence accuracy as much as shooter skill. The steel plate was barely visible through Rebecca's scope, even at maximum magnification, appearing as little more than a gray suggestion against the complex background of rocks and vegetation that provided natural camouflage. Rebecca's ballistic calculations now required accounting for variables that most marksmen never encountered during conventional training, including air density variations caused by altitude differences and temperature gradients that could affect bullet performance in ways that weren't captured by standard ballistic software. Her notebook contained correction factors derived from extensive testing under similar conditions, providing reference data that had been validated through hundreds of shots fired at comparable ranges. The atmospheric monitoring equipment positioned throughout the valley was beginning to register readings that approached the upper limits of safe shooting conditions, with wind speeds exceeding what most precision shooting doctrine considered manageable for consistent accuracy. Morrison found himself torn between his desire to see Rebecca fail and his professional responsibility to maintain safety standards that protected all personnel involved in the qualification exercise. Kim's spotting responsibilities became exponentially more complex as the range extended beyond what conventional military equipment was designed to handle effectively. His high-end optics provided magnification levels that revealed details invisible to standard military spotting scopes. But even the finest equipment had limitations when atmospheric conditions created optical distortions that made precise observation nearly impossible under rapidly deteriorating environmental circumstances. Rebecca's physical condition remained stable, despite the extended time spent in shooting position under environmental stressors that would have compromised the performance of less conditioned marksmen. Her training regimen had specifically prepared her for sustained precision shooting under adverse conditions, developing the physiological adaptations necessary to maintain accuracy when comfort and convenience were eliminated from the shooting equation completely. The fourth shot preparation required calculations that pushed the boundaries of what could be accomplished through manual computation under field conditions, demanding mathematical skills that exceeded what most military marksmen possessed or needed for conventional engagement scenarios. Rebecca's engineering background provided analytical capabilities that allowed her to solve complex ballistic problems in real time, adapting theoretical knowledge to practical applications that most shooters handled through simplified approximations. Morrison's radio communications revealed growing concern among range safety personnel about continuing the qualification under conditions that were deteriorating beyond what had been anticipated during the morning weather briefing. The decision to proceed would need to balance individual achievement against institutional safety policies that existed to protect personnel from unnecessary risks. During training exercises that simulated but didn't replicate actual combat conditions, Rebecca's sight picture for the 1,500-meter shot revealed a target that existed more as a mathematical concept than a visible objective, requiring her to use reference points and calculated holds, rather than conventional aiming techniques that relied on clearly defined target features. The skill required spatial reasoning abilities that few marksmen ever developed, demanding the integration of mathematical calculation with visual estimation under conditions that would overwhelm most conventional shooters. Her breathing control remained steady and rhythmic despite the mounting pressure of performing at the edge of human capability under the intense scrutiny of instructors whose expectations had been systematically exceeded throughout the morning. Rebecca's mental conditioning had prepared her for exactly these circumstances, developing the psychological resilience necessary to maintain performance when external pressures threatened to overwhelm cognitive function and motor control. Wind conditions for the fourth shot were so complex that Kim's reading required integrating observations from multiple indicators that showed conflicting information about atmospheric movement at different elevations along the bullet's extended flight path. His expertise in environmental interpretation would determine whether Rebecca's technical skill could be translated into successful target engagement under conditions that challenged the fundamental assumptions about what precision shooting could achieve. Morrison watched through his binoculars with the expression of someone whose worldview was being systematically dismantled by evidence that contradicted everything he thought he knew about gender limitations in high-stress military occupations. Rebecca's performance was forcing him to confront the possibility that his institutional bias had been preventing qualified candidates from demonstrating capabilities that exceeded his assumptions about what women could achieve under pressure. The fourth shot broke with the same mechanical precision that had characterized Rebecca's entire qualification sequence, but the atmospheric conditions during the bullet's nearly 3-second flight would determine whether human skill could overcome environmental variables that were approaching the theoretical limits of what precision shooting could achieve under field conditions. Her follow-through remained textbook perfect, despite increasing difficulty maintaining consistent sight picture through atmospheric distortion. The impact confirmation came after what seemed like an eternity of waiting, with Kim's spotting scope finally resolving the bullet strike through layers of atmospheric turbulence that had made observation nearly impossible. His radio call documented another center hit that exceeded what Morrison had believed possible under the deteriorating conditions that were testing the limits of equipment and human capability simultaneously. Rebecca's success through the first 4 targets had established a performance standard that was forcing everyone present to reconsider their assumptions about the intersection of gender, capability, and institutional barriers that had shaped military policy for generations. Morrison found himself confronting the uncomfortable possibility that his resistance to female snipers was based more on prejudice than evidence, creating cognitive dissonance that challenged fundamental beliefs about women in combat roles. Qualification course continued to stretch ahead with targets positioned at ranges that would test the absolute limits of rifle accuracy and human precision under conditions that were becoming increasingly hostile to successful marksmanship. Rebecca's performance had already exceeded expectations, but the most challenging shots lay ahead at distances where atmospheric effects would dominate. Every aspect of bullet trajectory and target engagement would require capabilities that few marksmen ever developed regardless of training or experience. Morrison's radio crackled with reports from meteorological stations throughout the region, confirming that the weather front was moving through faster than predicted and bringing atmospheric instability that would soon make precision shooting impossible, regardless of shooter skill or equipment quality. The window for completing the qualification was narrowing rapidly, creating time pressure that would test Rebecca's ability to maintain performance standards under circumstances that no amount of training could completely prepare her to handle effectively. Target 5 materialized through Rebecca's scope at 1,700 meters, a distance that existed beyond the effective range of most military rifles and challenged the fundamental assumptions about what constituted practical marksmanship under field conditions. The steel plate appeared as a barely perceptible gray dot against the mountainous backdrop, smaller than the intersection of her reticle's crosshairs, and visible only because of the perfect optical clarity provided by her precision-engineered scope system. The atmospheric conditions had deteriorated to levels that Morrison privately considered unsafe for continued precision shooting, with wind gusts now exceeding 35 miles per hour and creating turbulence patterns that defied prediction or compensation through conventional marksmanship techniques. His radio communications with regional weather services confirmed that the approaching storm front was moving faster than meteorological models had predicted, bringing atmospheric instability that would soon make accurate shooting impossible regardless of equipment quality or shooter expertise. Rebecca's ballistic calculations for the 1,700-meter engagement required accounting for variables that pushed beyond the limitations of standard military doctrine and entered territory typically reserved for specialized applications that few marksmen ever encountered during conventional training. The bullet's flight time would approach 3 seconds, enough for atmospheric conditions to change dramatically during the projectile's journey and potentially deflect it several feet from the intended impact point, despite perfect shooting technique. Kim's spotting responsibilities had evolved from providing wind readings to interpreting atmospheric chaos that challenged his ability to make meaningful predictions about environmental effects on bullet trajectory. His high-end optics revealed mirage patterns that twisted and shifted unpredictably, indicating thermal activity and air movement that would require unprecedented expertise to read accurately. The partnership between shooter and spotter was being tested by conditions that exceeded anything either had experienced during their extensive training. Morrison found himself secretly hoping that atmospheric conditions would force a postponement of the qualification before Rebecca could complete the course, providing a face-saving explanation for ending an exercise that was systematically destroying his assumptions about female limitations in precision shooting. His institutional reputation was becoming increasingly connected to Rebecca's performance, creating personal stakes that extended far beyond individual evaluation of a single candidate's capabilities. The rifle barrel temperature had stabilized within optimal parameters despite the cold ambient conditions, but Rebecca monitored thermal readings carefully through an infrared thermometer clipped to her equipment belt. Excessive heating could change the barrel's harmonic characteristics and shift point of impact unpredictably, while insufficient warmth might affect powder burn rates and create velocity variations that would compromise accuracy at extreme ranges, where consistency was absolutely critical for success. Rebecca's ammunition selection for the longer engagements involved cartridges that had been specifically prepared for extreme range shooting, with bullet weights and powder charges optimized for stability during extended flight times through varying atmospheric conditions. Each round represented the culmination of extensive load development work that had consumed months of testing and hundreds of dollars in components to achieve the performance levels necessary for consistent accuracy at distances that challenged equipment limitations. The scope adjustments required for 1,700 meters demanded multiple revolutions of the elevation turret, with Rebecca counting clicks audibly to prevent errors that would result in complete misses regardless of shooting technique. The mathematical relationship between angular adjustment and linear displacement at extreme range meant that single-click errors could translate into misses measured in feet rather than inches, emphasizing the critical importance of precise mechanical manipulation under stressful conditions. Morrison's assistant instructors exchanged glances that reflected their collective amazement at witnessing shooting performance that exceeded what they had observed from experienced snipers with years of operational background and extensive combat experience. Rebecca's consistency under increasingly difficult conditions was forcing them to reconsider their assumptions about the relationship between gender and performance in high-stress military occupations that demanded absolute precision under adverse circumstances. The wind reading for the fifth shot required Kim to integrate information from indicators positioned throughout the valley that showed conflicting data about atmospheric movement at different elevations along the bullet's flight path. His experience interpreting complex environmental conditions would determine whether Rebecca's technical expertise could overcome natural forces that were approaching the theoretical limits of what human skill could compensate for through calculation and technique alone. Rebecca's mental state had achieved the heightened focus that characterized peak performance under extreme pressure, with her consciousness narrowed to include only the variables that directly affected shot placement, while filtering out distractions that might compromise her ability to execute perfect technique under impossible conditions. Her engineering training had provided analytical frameworks for managing complex systems under stress, allowing her to maintain cognitive function when others might be overwhelmed by information overload. The atmospheric monitoring equipment throughout the valley was registering readings that approached the upper limits of safe shooting parameters, with several stations reporting gusts that exceeded what precision shooting doctrine considered manageable for consistent accuracy. Morrison faced the increasingly difficult decision of whether to continue the qualification under conditions that were deteriorating beyond what anyone had anticipated during the morning planning session. Rebecca's shooting position had been optimized for the extended engagement sequence, with equipment arranged for easy access and body positioning adjusted to minimize fatigue during the lengthy qualification process. Her physical conditioning allowed her to maintain shooting posture without significant degradation, instability, or precision, demonstrating the physiological preparation that separated professional snipers from recreational marksmen who excelled during brief range sessions but struggled with sustained performance. The fifth shot preparation involved calculations that exceeded what most marksmen attempted under field conditions, requiring Rebecca to account for Coriolis effects, atmospheric density variations, and complex wind patterns that changed throughout the bullet's extended flight time. Her notebook contained reference data from similar shooting scenarios, providing baseline information that could be modified based on real-time environmental observations and atmospheric measurements. Morrison's radio communications revealed growing concern among range safety personnel about visibility conditions that were becoming marginal due to intermittent snow flurries and atmospheric distortion caused by the approaching weather front. The decision to continue or postpone would need to be made soon, creating time pressure that added another layer of stress to an already challenging qualification exercise that was testing the limits of human capability under adverse conditions. Kim's spotting equipment was reaching the limits of its capability, as atmospheric conditions created optical distortions that made precise observation increasingly difficult even with the finest available optics. His ability to provide accurate wind readings and impact observations would determine whether Rebecca's remarkable performance could be sustained through the remaining targets that existed at distances where equipment limitations became as significant as shooter skill in determining successful outcomes. Rebecca's trigger control remained consistent despite the mounting pressure of performing at the edge of human capability, under intense scrutiny from instructors whose expectations had been systematically exceeded throughout the qualification. Her muscle memory executed perfect technique while her conscious mind processed the complex calculations required for extreme-range shooting under conditions that would overwhelm most marksmen, regardless of their experience or training background. The crosshairs settled on the 1,700-meter target with mathematical precision that reflected thousands of hours of practice and preparation. But successful hit probability would depend on atmospheric cooperation during the bullets. 3-second flight through increasingly unstable air. Rebecca's hold appeared perfect through her scope, but the environmental variables affecting bullet trajectory were approaching the limits of what human skill could predict or compensate for accurately. Morrison found himself unconsciously holding his breath as he watched Rebecca prepare for a shot that would either confirm her exceptional capabilities or reveal the limitations that he still hoped would validate his skepticism about women in sniper roles. His binoculars revealed shooting technique that was textbook perfect, displaying none of the stress indicators that typically preceded candidate failures during the school's most challenging evaluations. The fifth shot broke with the same mechanical precision that had characterized Rebecca's entire qualification sequence, sending another carefully crafted projectile toward a target that existed at the very edge of what precision shooting could achieve under ideal conditions, let alone the deteriorating circumstances that were testing every aspect of her preparation and skill. Her follow-through remained automatic despite the increasing difficulty of maintaining sight picture through atmospheric turbulence. Kim's spotting scope tracked the bullet's vapor trail through air that was becoming increasingly chaotic as thermal activity and wind shear created optical distortions that made precise observation nearly impossible even with professional-grade equipment. His experience reading atmospheric conditions under difficult circumstances would determine whether the shot placement could be confirmed through visual observation or would require electronic confirmation systems. The impact confirmation came after an extended delay that seemed to stretch for minutes rather than seconds, with multiple spotters using different observation points to verify the hit that Kim's primary scope had difficulty resolving through the atmospheric distortion. The metallic ring of bullet-striking steel finally echoed across the valley with authority, followed by radio confirmation of another center hit that exceeded what anyone present had believed possible under the conditions. Morrison's expression revealed internal conflict that he could no longer conceal completely, acknowledging that Rebecca's performance was forcing him to confront fundamental assumptions about gender and capability that had shaped his military career and personal worldview for decades. The evidence was becoming impossible to dismiss or rationalize away through convenient explanations about luck, favorable conditions, or reduced standards. Target 6 waited at 1,900 meters, positioned at a distance that challenged the theoretical capabilities of Rebecca's rifle and ammunition combination under perfect conditions, let alone the hostile environment that was developing throughout the valley. The steel plate was invisible to naked eye observation and barely perceptible through the finest optical equipment available, existing more as a mathematical concept than a visible target for conventional aiming techniques. The atmospheric data revealed conditions that were approaching the threshold where precision shooting became impossible regardless of equipment quality or shooter skill, with wind patterns that defied prediction and atmospheric density variations that would affect bullet trajectories in ways that couldn't be calculated accurately through field-expedient methods. Rebecca's success would require perfect execution, combined with environmental cooperation that was becoming increasingly unlikely. As conditions deteriorated, Rebecca's preparation for the 1,900-meter shot involved mental calculations that pushed the boundaries of what could be accomplished without computer assistance, requiring her to integrate multiple complex variables in real time, while maintaining the physical control necessary for perfect shooting technique. Her engineering background provided mathematical tools that few marksmen possessed, but even advanced analytical skills had limitations when confronted with chaotic natural systems. Kim's wind reading responsibilities had evolved beyond conventional spotting techniques to include atmospheric interpretation that bordered on meteorological forecasting, requiring him to predict environmental conditions during the bullet's extended flight time through air that was changing faster than observation could track. His expertise would determine whether Rebecca's technical capabilities could overcome natural forces that were challenging the fundamental assumptions about precision. Shooting. Morrison's radio crackled with urgent communications from multiple weather monitoring stations throughout the region, confirming that the storm front was accelerating and would soon bring conditions that would make continued shooting operations unsafe regardless of institutional pressure to complete individual qualification attempts. The window for finishing the course was narrowing rapidly, creating time constraints that added another layer of complexity to an already impossible situation. Rebecca's rifle had performed flawlessly throughout the qualification, but the extreme ranges were testing mechanical limits that even the finest precision equipment couldn't overcome indefinitely. Her scope's tracking accuracy remained consistent, but the magnitude of adjustments required for 1,900 meters was approaching the upper limits of the turret system's reliable range, entering territory where mechanical precision became as critical as shooting technique. The ammunition temperature had stabilized within acceptable parameters, but Rebecca monitored cartridge readings carefully through thermal sensors that provided real-time data about powder conditions that could affect muzzle velocity and trajectory calculations. Temperature variations of just a few degrees could change bullet performance enough to cause complete misses at extreme range, emphasizing the critical importance of environmental control under field conditions. Morrison's observations revealed shooting preparation that exceeded what he had witnessed from legendary marksmen, whose reputations were built on decades of operational experience and countless successful engagements under combat conditions. Rebecca's methodical approach suggested training and mental discipline that challenged his assumptions about the development time required to achieve elite-level performance in precision shooting applications. The scope adjustments for 1,900 meters required precision that tested the limits of Rebecca's mechanical skills, with elevation changes measured in multiple revolutions of the turret system and windage corrections that demanded perfect tracking accuracy from optical equipment that was approaching the boundaries of its design specifications. Single errors in adjustment would result in misses measured in yards rather than inches at such extreme distances. Rebecca's breathing control remained steady, despite the physiological stress of maintaining shooting position under environmental conditions that were becoming increasingly hostile to sustained precision performance. Her mental conditioning allowed her to compartmentalize external pressures, while focusing on the technical requirements for extreme-range shooting that demanded absolute concentration on variables that most marksmen never encountered during conventional training. Kim's spotting equipment was struggling to provide clear observation through atmospheric conditions that created optical distortions comparable to looking through moving water, making precise wind reading and target observation nearly impossible. Even with the finest available optics, his ability to guide Rebecca's shot placement would determine whether human skill could overcome environmental challenges that were approaching the theoretical limits of what precision shooting could achieve. The sixth shot preparation required Rebecca to account for ballistic variables that exceeded the parameters of standard military shooting doctrine, entering territory typically reserved for specialized applications that demanded expertise developed through years of dedicated study and practice. Her calculations integrated atmospheric physics with projectile dynamics in ways that few marksmen ever attempted under field conditions. Morrison found himself hoping that environmental conditions would force a qualification postponement before Rebecca could complete the remaining targets, providing a face-saving explanation for ending an exercise that was systematically destroying every assumption he had maintained about female limitations in high-stress military occupations. His professional reputation was becoming increasingly connected to the outcome of Rebecca's performance. The wind conditions for the 1900-meter shot were so complex that Kim's reading required integrating conflicting information from multiple sources throughout the valley, creating atmospheric data that defied simple interpretation or straightforward compensation through conventional marksmanship techniques. The environmental challenges were approaching levels that would overwhelm even the most experienced snipers, regardless of their operational background or training. Rebecca's sight picture revealed a target that existed at the very limit of optical resolution, requiring her to use mathematical holds and reference points, rather than conventional aiming techniques that relied on clearly visible target features. The skill demanded spatial reasoning abilities that few marksmen ever developed, combining analytical calculation with intuitive understanding of complex ballistic relationships under impossible conditions. Her trigger control remained mechanically perfect, despite the mounting pressure of performing beyond normal human capabilities under the intense scrutiny of instructors, whose worldviews were being challenged by evidence that contradicted decades of assumptions about gender and performance in precision shooting applications. The integration of mental calculation with physical execution represented the highest levels of marksmanship that most shooters never achieved regardless of training or experience. The sixth shot broke with crystalline precision that reflected thousands of hours of preparation and natural talent that couldn't be taught through conventional instruction methods. But the atmospheric conditions during the bullet's nearly 4-second flight would determine whether human capability could overcome environmental variables that were testing the theoretical limits of what precision shooting could accomplish under field conditions. Morrison's binoculars tracked the target area while multiple spotters coordinated through radio communications to provide comprehensive observation coverage for a shot that was pushing beyond the boundaries of what conventional military equipment and doctrine considered practical for field applications. The institutional implications of Rebecca's performance were becoming impossible to ignore or rationalize away through convenient explanations. The impact confirmation required verification from multiple observation points due to atmospheric conditions that made visual confirmation nearly impossible through any single spotting system. But the eventual radio call documented another perfect center hit that exceeded what the most optimistic observers had considered possible under the deteriorating environmental circumstances that were challenging every aspect of precision shooting doctrine. Kim's amazed voice carried across the radio frequencies with professional composure that couldn't completely mask his astonishment at witnessing performance that transcended normal human capabilities under conditions that would have defeated the most experienced snipers in military history. His confirmation of Rebecca's sixth consecutive center hit at 1900 meters established a performance standard that would force institutional changes throughout the military establishment. Morrison's expression revealed the complete collapse of assumptions that had shaped his military career and personal beliefs about gender limitations in high-stress occupations that demanded absolute precision under adverse conditions. Rebecca's performance was providing irrefutable evidence that capability transcended gender in ways that institutional bias had prevented the military from recognizing or acknowledging through decades of discriminatory policies. The remaining targets stretched ahead at distances that challenged the fundamental principles of rifle accuracy and human precision under conditions that were deteriorating beyond what anyone had anticipated during the qualification planning process. Rebecca's success through 6 consecutive targets had exceeded every expectation, but the most impossible shots lay ahead at ranges where atmospheric effects would dominate. Every aspect of bullet trajectory and target engagement would require capabilities that existed at the very limits of human potential. The storm front was approaching rapidly, bringing atmospheric instability that would soon make precision shooting impossible regardless of equipment quality or shooter expertise, creating time pressure that would test Rebecca's ability to maintain performance standards under circumstances that no amount of training could completely prepare anyone to handle effectively. The window for completing her historic qualification was narrowing with each passing minute, adding urgency to challenges that already existed at the boundaries of what precision shooting could achieve. Morrison's radio communications revealed coordination with senior officers who were monitoring the qualification remotely, understanding that Rebecca's performance had implications that extended far beyond individual achievement to encompass fundamental questions about military effectiveness and institutional policies that had restricted opportunities based on gender rather than demonstrated capability. The political ramifications of her success were becoming as significant as the technical achievement itself. Rebecca's preparation for the remaining targets would require sustained performance at levels that few marksmen ever achieved under ideal conditions, let alone the hostile environment that was developing throughout the Montana Valley. Her success had already exceeded what Morrison had believed possible, but the ultimate test lay ahead in shots that would determine whether human capability could transcend the limitations that institutional bias had imposed on military potential. For generations, the final target waited at 2,200 meters, a distance so extreme that it existed beyond the published effective range of Rebecca's rifle system and challenged every principle of conventional marksmanship doctrine. The steel plate was completely invisible to naked eye observation and appeared as nothing more than a theoretical point in space where mathematics suggested a target should exist, requiring Rebecca to aim at empty mountainside while trusting calculations that pushed beyond established ballistic science. Morrison's radio crackled with urgent communications from base command, where senior officers monitored the qualification remotely through real-time video feeds and atmospheric data. That confirmed Rebecca's performance was rewriting the boundaries of human capability under impossible conditions. Colonel Sarah Martinez, the first female officer to command an infantry regiment, had flown in specifically to witness what might become the most significant moment in military gender integration history. The atmospheric conditions had deteriorated to levels that exceeded all safety protocols, with wind gusts approaching 45 miles per hour and visibility reduced by snow squalls that transformed the valley into a maelstrom of white chaos. Standard operating procedures mandated immediate exercise termination, but Rebecca's historic performance had created circumstances that no military regulation had anticipated or addressed adequately. Rebecca's final calculations required her to account for bullet drop exceeding 20 feet during the projectile's 5-second flight time, with wind drift compensation that could approach 10 yards in any direction, depending on atmospheric conditions that changed faster than human observation could track. She was essentially firing at a mathematical concept rather than a visible target, trusting 4 years of engineering education and thousands of hours of shooting experience to guide a bullet through chaos. Kim's spotting scope had fogged completely, despite repeated cleaning attempts, leaving him unable to provide the critical environmental readings that conventional sniper doctrine considered essential for extreme range engagement success. Rebecca was now completely dependent on her own interpretation of atmospheric conditions, visible through her primary optics, forced to make decisions based solely on training and instinct that few marksmen ever developed regardless of experience. The rifle's mechanical systems were operating at the absolute limits of their design specifications, with thermal stress and atmospheric moisture, creating conditions that challenged the precision tolerances necessary for accuracy at such extreme distances. Rebecca could feel slight changes in the bolt's operation that indicated environmental contamination was affecting the weapon's reliability, but stopping to perform maintenance would end her qualification attempt permanently. Morrison found himself silently willing Rebecca to succeed despite decades of institutional bias that had shaped his resistance to women in combat roles. Her performance had systematically destroyed every assumption he had maintained about gender limitations, forcing him to confront the uncomfortable reality that his Prejudices had been preventing qualified personnel from demonstrating capabilities that exceeded his understanding of human potential. The final shot preparation took place under time pressure that added psychological stress to technical challenges that already existed at the boundaries of what precision shooting could achieve under any circumstances. The approaching storm front would soon make continued operations impossible, creating a narrow window that demanded immediate action despite conditions that would normally justify exercise postponement. Rebecca's breathing entered the zone that existed beyond conscious control, where physiological responses synchronized with mental focus to create a state of heightened awareness that few humans ever experienced. Her heart rate settled into the rhythm that had carried her through 3 previous deployments in Afghanistan, where split-second decisions determined survival and precision meant the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. The crosshairs found their position against empty sky, where mathematical calculations indicated the invisible target waited, with Rebecca's hold-off so extreme that casual observers would assume she was aiming at clouds rather than attempting precision fire at a steel plate hidden beyond the visible horizon. Her scope's magnification revealed atmospheric distortion that made precise aiming impossible through conventional techniques. Kim abandoned his useless spotting equipment and provided final encouragement through radio communications that carried the weight of partnership forged through months of training and shared commitment to proving that excellence transcended arbitrary limitations imposed by institutional bias. His voice reflected amazement at witnessing performance that redefined the boundaries of human capability under conditions that challenged survival itself. The trigger broke with mechanical perfection that reflected muscle memory developed through thousands of repetitions, but the outcome would depend on variables that exceeded human ability to predict or control completely. Rebecca's follow-through was automatic, maintaining sight picture and trigger pressure while tracking a bullet trace. That disappeared immediately into atmospheric chaos that made visual confirmation impossible. 5 seconds of flight time stretched into eternity as physics and determination combined to determine whether months of preparation and years of dreams could overcome environmental forces that tested the theoretical limits of rifle accuracy. The projectile followed a parabolic arc that carried it nearly 40 feet above the line of sight, before gravity claimed its inevitable victory over velocity and determination. Morrison's radio exploded with confirmations from multiple observation posts positioned throughout the valley, where spotters using different vantage points and equipment systems coordinated to verify impact location through atmospheric conditions that had made visual confirmation nearly impossible for any single observer. The metallic ring of bullet-striking steel echoed through the storm with finality that seemed to settle something fundamental about human potential. Perfect center hit. Kim's voice carried across the radio frequencies with professional composure. That couldn't mask his astonishment at witnessing something that transcended normal human capability under conditions that would have defeated legendary marksmen with decades of operational experience. Rebecca had achieved perfect accuracy at a distance that challenged the fundamental assumptions about precision shooting under any circumstances. The immediate aftermath brought stunned silence from observation posts throughout the valley as military personnel processed the implications of witnessing performance that would force institutional changes throughout the armed forces. Rebecca had not merely passed the qualification, but had redefined what was considered possible for precision marksmanship under conditions that existed beyond the boundaries of conventional doctrine. Morrison approached Rebecca's position with the expression of someone whose worldview had been fundamentally altered by evidence that could not be dismissed or rationalized away through convenient explanations. His handshake carried the weight of institutional acknowledgement that capability transcended gender in ways that military policy had failed to recognize for generations, opening doors that had been closed by prejudice rather than evidence. Colonel Martinez's helicopter landed within minutes of the final shot confirmation, bringing with her authorization to immediately implement policy changes that would open advanced sniper training to qualified female personnel throughout the Marine Corps. Rebecca's performance had provided irrefutable proof that excellence knew no gender boundaries when combined with proper preparation, unwavering determination, and the courage to attempt what others considered impossible. The qualification records were sealed and forwarded directly to Pentagon leadership, where Rebecca's achievement would be studied and analyzed for decades as an example of human potential unleashed under extreme conditions. Her perfect score under impossible circumstances established a performance standard that might never be equaled by any marksman, regardless of background or experience, providing a benchmark that transcended gender to encompass pure human capability. Rebecca's military career continued with immediate assignment to the most elite sniper units in the Marine Corps, where her expertise would be developed through operational deployments that validated every aspect of her qualification performance. Her success opened pathways for countless women who followed, facing fewer barriers and more opportunities, because one person had been willing to prove that limitations existed primarily in assumptions rather than reality. Years later, Rebecca would reflect on that stormy Montana morning not as the day she broke records, but as the moment she proved that human potential recognizes no artificial boundaries when confronted with proper training, absolute determination, and the courage to push beyond what others consider possible. Her legacy lived not in the targets she hit, but in the barriers she shattered and the opportunities she created for future generations, who would never face the assumption that their gender determined their capabilities. The Scout Sniper School graduation ceremony 3 months later included the largest class of female candidates in military history, with Rebecca serving as the keynote speaker for Marines who would carry her example into combat zones around the world. Her message emphasized fundamentals and mental discipline rather than attempting to replicate extraordinary performance, recognizing that sustainable excellence required mastery of basics rather than reliance on exceptional circumstances. Morrison stood in the audience that day with the expression of someone who had learned that growth required confronting uncomfortable truths about personal bias and institutional prejudice that had limited human potential for decades. His introduction of Rebecca acknowledged that her achievement had taught him more about leadership and capability than 40 years of military service, providing lessons that would influence his instruction of future candidates regardless of their background or gender. 10 years after that historic Montana morning, Master Sergeant Rebecca Chen stood before a packed auditorium at Marine Corps Base Quantico, addressing the largest gathering of military snipers in American history. The audience included operators from every branch of service, with many having traveled from allied nations specifically to hear from the woman who had redefined the boundaries of precision marksmanship under impossible conditions. Rebecca's uniform bore the ribbons of 4 combat deployments where she had consistently delivered precision fire at ranges that other snipers considered theoretical maximums. Her confirmed elimination count exceeded 200 enemy combatants, with many engagements occurring at distances that had required her to develop new techniques for environmental compensation and ballistic calculation under combat stress that would have overwhelmed less prepared marksmen. Morrison sat in the front row wearing the stars of a newly promoted brigadier general, his career advancement accelerated by recognition that his evolution from skeptic to advocate represented the institutional change that military leadership desperately needed. His doctoral dissertation on gender integration in special operations had become required reading at staff colleges worldwide, providing academic framework for policy reforms that had opened elite units to qualified personnel, regardless of background. The statistics Rebecca presented that day revealed the exponential growth in female participation across all precision shooting disciplines, with success rates that matched or exceeded their male counterparts in every measurable category. The military had discovered an untapped reservoir of talent that institutional bias had prevented from contributing to national defense capabilities for generations, resulting in force multiplication effects that enhanced operational effectiveness. Across all theaters, Lieutenant Colonel David Kim commanded the Advanced Sniper training facility that had been established specifically to develop techniques pioneered during Rebecca's legendary qualification. His curriculum emphasized environmental interpretation and extreme-range engagement, methods that pushed the boundaries of what conventional doctrine considered practical, preparing a new generation of marksmen to operate effectively under conditions that previous training had deemed impossible. The technological advances in precision shooting equipment had been driven partly by data collected during Rebecca's historic performance, with manufacturers developing systems specifically designed to function effectively under the environmental extremes that she had proven could be overcome through proper technique and determination. Her input had influenced everything from ballistic software to optical design, resulting in capability improvements that benefited military and civilian shooters equally. Rebecca's foundation provided scholarships and training opportunities for young women interested in competitive shooting sports, creating pathways into military service that had previously been obscured by cultural assumptions about appropriate career fields for female personnel. The program had already produced dozens of scholarship recipients who were pursuing military careers with full understanding that excellence rather than gender would determine their opportunities for advancement. The international recognition of Rebecca's achievement had elevated American military prestige while demonstrating the strategic advantages that emerged from maximizing human potential regardless of traditional limitations or cultural bias. Foreign military delegations regularly visited American training facilities to observe techniques that had been developed through her experience, with many nations implementing similar integration programs to enhance their own operational capabilities. Morrison's closing remarks that day acknowledged that Rebecca's greatest achievement was not the perfect qualification that had made her famous, but the institutional transformation that her performance had catalyzed throughout the military establishment. She had proven that barriers existed primarily in assumptions rather than reality, opening possibilities that would benefit countless individuals who might otherwise never have the opportunity to demonstrate their capabilities. The audience rose in sustained applause as Rebecca concluded her presentation with a challenge to every person present to examine their own assumptions about what others could achieve when given proper training, genuine opportunity, and the courage to attempt what seemed impossible. Her legacy was measured not in targets hit, but in barriers removed and potential unleashed across an entire generation of military personnel. Rebecca's personal life had flourished alongside her professional success, with her marriage to a fellow Marine officer producing 2 daughters who were already demonstrating remarkable aptitude in competitive shooting sports. Her children understood their mother's achievements as normal rather than extraordinary, representing generational change. Where female excellence in traditionally male-dominated fields was accepted as natural rather than remarkable. The documentary film about Rebecca's qualification had won multiple awards and been translated into dozens of languages, inspiring women worldwide to pursue goals that others had dismissed as impossible for their gender. Her story had transcended military applications to become a symbol of human potential unleashed when determination encountered opportunity, regardless of artificial limitations imposed by societal expectations. The medical research conducted during Rebecca's operational deployments had provided valuable insights into stress management and performance optimization under extreme conditions, contributing to training programs that enhanced effectiveness across all military specialties. Her physiological responses to combat stress had been studied extensively, revealing techniques for maintaining precision under pressure that could benefit any personnel operating in high-stress environments. Rebecca's retirement ceremony drew attendees from across the military spectrum, with her replacement as senior instructor being selected from dozens of highly qualified female candidates who had followed her path into advanced sniper training. The transition represented institutional maturity, where exceptional performance was recognized and rewarded based on demonstrated capability rather than demographic characteristics, fulfilling her original goal of creating genuine equality of opportunity. The museum display honoring Rebecca's achievement included the rifle that had delivered her perfect performance, retired after accumulating documented accuracy records that exceeded anything previously achieved by military precision. Weapons. The exhibit served as a permanent reminder that extraordinary accomplishment often required pushing beyond the boundaries of what seemed safe or reasonable, inspiring visitors to reconsider their own limitations. Rebecca's final interview before retiring from public speaking emphasized that her story represented something larger than individual achievement or military excellence. She had demonstrated that human potential knows no gender boundaries when combined with proper preparation, unwavering determination, and institutional support that recognizes capability rather than category membership as the measure of opportunity. The ripple effects of Rebecca's achievement continued expanding decades after her qualification, influencing policy decisions and cultural attitudes far beyond military applications. Every woman who pursued goals she had been told were impossible, for her gender carried forward the legacy of someone who had refused to accept limitations imposed by others' assumptions about what she could accomplish. Rebecca's story reminds us that barriers often exist more in perception than reality, waiting for someone brave enough to test their actual strength rather than accepting their assumed permanence. Her legacy challenges each of us to examine what we've been told is impossible and ask whether those limitations represent genuine obstacles or simply assumptions that no one has bothered to question thoroughly. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.